Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. As you can see, we've got things going a little bit quicker here. It's been only a couple of days since the last live stream, and while I do have a lot of stuff to cover, at least it's not quite so overwhelming of a load. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's coming your way. By the way, Lucille, Jerry, glad to see you both here, and looking forward to seeing everybody else coming in as they do so. And I hope that they'll pipe in and let us know that they're here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on one of the more interesting things that have been developing. Originally, we thought that the North Koreans were only sending troops, and of course, they sent all those artillery shells and other things like that. But now they're sending actual military vehicles, hardware. This is a 170 millimeter M1989 Kosan howitzer. It was spotted in Russia about halfway through the country. It's North Korean in nature, and it appears that they were training the Russian gunners on using these North Korean artillery systems. Here's a better quality photo of that vehicle in Krasnoyarsk, Russia, which is, by the way, right over here. As you can see, Ukraine's on the left, and Krasnoyarsk is over here, kind of in the middle of nowhere, straight above Mongolia. So this is equipment that's coming across the rails here. The interesting part is that initially we were thinking that the North Koreans were going to be more of an advisory role or some kind of a lesser point. They appear to have mostly ended up in the Kursk region, and the Ukrainians have already started having contact with them. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out in the long term. Now, this post right here from War Gonzo, now War Gonzo is a Russian source, is about the North Koreans talking about fighting in the same trench as the Russians. We are in the same trench with the Russians. I'm not going to go through the whole title here. Lately, the Korean People's Army, or Chosun Inmungun, has been written about in the news every day in relation to the special military operation. Sometimes photos of the ultra-long-range 170 millimeter self-propelled guns of North Korean manufacturers appear somewhere in the vastness of Russia. Sometimes non-brothers and Western partners throw another tantrum about the North Korean warriors who allegedly arrived at the front in large numbers. Now they're considering the possibility of introducing new sanctions against North Korea, while Biden is serving out his term in the White House. And as the overall idea is that, yes, we are seeing more and more of the North Koreans, of their approximately 10,000 strong presence on the battlefield. Not seen any indications they've been particularly effective on the battlefield, but understand that Kim Jong-un is probably going to start sending all kinds of hardware and equipment. So something to keep an eye on as we continue forward. By the way, Steve, glad to have you here as well. Always glad to have you on board. North Korea has also begun mass production of attack drones. Where did they get the technology to make attack drones? Well, you can guess. Russia, from Iran. So we have a nice little short circuit right through there, from Iran to Russia to North Korea. And now they're going to be producing their own drones, which South Korea is going to have to deal with. This is what we get when we don't properly put the bully down. North Korea has sent 50 self-propelled howitzers and 20 upgraded MLRS systems to Russia for its offensive war against Ukraine, according to the Financial Times. This really kind of shows the greater military ties between the two nations. And as always, we're going to have to keep an eye on it. On the other hand, there are some fractures showing in the relationship here. A Russian priest has urged soldiers not to listen to the devilish words of godless North Koreans who have arrived from distant lands, claiming they have brought some kind of plague to our land. I'm not sure what else you can say about that. I mean, talk about your paranoia. Of course, and again, they are North Koreans. We certainly know their bellies will be full of parasites. Overall, it looks like the numbers have gotten up to about 12,000 North Koreans showing up in Ukraine, or actually in Russia, in the Kursk region. The overall effect of this, though, is to be noted that North Korea has an enormous standing army. 10,000 troops is not many. I believe they have around 1.2 million, just going from memory, soldiers, but most of them are not full-time soldiers. They spend their time gathering food, doing those types of peasant work, and then they have been trained to hold a rifle and do what they're told. So overall, even though they have a huge standing army, the number of them that are going to be effectively highly trained and capable is going to be relatively small. But we'll have to keep an eye on that overall. I'm not putting down North Korea. That's just the nature of their military overall. They have a huge amount of soldiers, but the number of them that are dedicated to being just soldiers is relatively small. Now, of course, we talked about the election of Donald Trump recently and how it might affect things in Ukraine. I'm seeing more positive indications out of this in some ways. From President Zelensky, negotiations with Russia are only possible if Ukraine is strong and not alone with a killer. Adding that a sit and listen approach won't work. Ukraine is a sovereign nation. The U.S. standing by Ukraine is crucial, and they must maintain this position. And he does talk about Trump a little bit more later. Then he added in another interview, we must do everything to ensure that the war in 2025 ends diplomatically. Now, this is the only way a war tends to end, except for the outright destruction of one of the combatants. But he is talking about wanting to have a diplomatic solution more on Ukraine's terms than Russia's. On the other hand, Kuleba, who is I believe, the foreign minister for Ukraine at this point in time, said those who expect de-escalation under Trump may be shocked in the coming months. Now, this could be trying to gin up some expectations for it. This could be maybe trying to will that circumstance into being. It could also be true because Donald Trump tends to have a variety of perspectives, and one of them is about his reputation. Specifically, he would not want to be seen as the one who allowed the Western world to collapse in favor of Russia and China. Zelensky stated that he thought that under Donald Trump, the war in Ukraine will end faster than expected. Again, we've seen some indications that could be a positive sign. Others are thinking the sky is falling. Take your pick as to which one you wish to believe. The position of Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine may be filled with a lawyer of Russian origin, Boris Epshteyn. Now, that is an unfortunate name to have associated with right now, but either way, Epshteyn was actually in Russia. He moved to the United States in 1993, and he was a 2016 presidential campaign advisor to the campaign. He then became a special assistant to the administration. I do not know much about Mr. Epshteyn here or his perspectives. It's an interesting, so right now I'm highlighting it as interesting, but I don't have a feel for what it actually means in the long run. According to Politico opinion editor Jamie Detmer, Trump may be the one to bring the war in Ukraine to an end, while some European leaders and even Ukraine secretly are relieved by the prospect. While the deal could mean ugly concessions, it could offer the West an alibi and relieve them from what Detmer sees as an unwinnable war. And as I've mentioned many times, the only unwinnable war is the war you decide to stop fighting. But I am not Ukrainian. I am not the Ukrainian people. They are the ones who have to decide when they've either had too much or if they are able to continue fighting for longer. I can't speak to that. But it is a possibility that European leaders might think that Trump would give them some cover and end this thing without them having to actually make the hard decisions of potentially sending European troops into the country. It all depends on what's going on a geopolitical perspective, and there are so many possibilities that I can't even touch on them all. So this is one opinion. There's some, like I said, there's some reason to be positive or have hope for the situation, and there's reasons to be down on it. Just pay attention and decide based on what you know, what you believe to be true on that one. Let's go ahead and move over to the news out of Ukraine itself. Local reports confirm several strikes in Odessa, causing significant damage to civilian infrastructure. A main heating pipeline was hit, and buildings are burning in various districts. So Odessa has once again become a direct target of strikes by Russians. Odessa is not very rarely directly involved in any of the combat, so this is basically striking at civilians and civilian infrastructure in as much as they can. Ukraine is set to launch an Israeli air raid early warning system, now in its final implementation stage. The system will precisely predict the target area of airborne threats and provide alerts on how many minutes or seconds people have to take cover. Now, this is an interesting one to me because one of the major advantages, and I hate to say it that way, but one of the advantages that Israel has is that their enemies tend to primarily have unguided, dumbfiring missiles, rockets and missiles. So once they are in their ballistic trajectory, they are now predictable. Whereas Ukraine is dealing with guided munitions and drones, which by nature can be unpredictable. That does not mean that they always are or whatever, but interesting to see them implementing a similar system as the Israelis have, who have the most experience with dealing with a variety of these types of threats. So I'll be interested to hear later on if there's the actual effectiveness or efficacy of this system. It might help some areas actually sleep a little better at night. By the way, Stephen Pace says Ukrainian morale depends on our support, and it does to a great deal. The more support they have, the more weapons and equipment and supplies and air defense systems they get, they tend to have better morale and are able to keep fighting longer. Ukrainian euro bonds have surged by 12% in the past month, according to the Financial Times. Investors, they believe, are optimistic that Trump's election as president could lead to a ceasefire and improve Ukraine's debt repayment prospects. Possibly. Just one more aspect that might be attributable to Trump, or it could just plain be seasonal variation. Winter has managed to arrive at last in Kharkiv, with icy roads and wet snow expected across most of Ukraine. Now things start getting interesting as far as traveling goes. Now, once the ground hardens, there'll be another opportunity to do more aggressive actions. As far as I've heard, they're kind of mostly in the middle of mudding season right now, but it's such a varied, it's weather. I have not kept close track of it because overall, I watched the lines and the politics. From President Zelensky, he was speaking to Ukrainian radio. He mentioned there are 4 types of missiles currently undergoing testing. And he said that in general, Ukraine is now one of the strongest and most technologically advanced armies in the world, and external funding as well as Ukraine's internal budget for development of new technologies are truly impressive. Now, he did specify that when he said the world, he said for sure Europe. And that makes a lot of sense because a lot of technology and experience in warfare has now coalesced into Ukraine itself. Therefore, you can make a really good case that they are one of the leading militaries in the world. Not the largest, but one of the leading. AI is seeing more of an entry onto the battlefield in drones, and the overall result is that drones are no longer quite so tied to communication systems. They are given AI directions and learning systems, and then when they get close to their target, they're turned to an independent mode, and now you can't really jam them. You could potentially use electronic interference to maybe stop the motors or interfere with the electronics. But from a guidance system, once that no longer is requiring a radio signal to talk to the host or base station anymore and doing its own independent thought, now there's no way to jam that drone and prevent it from doing its attack. The only thing you can do is try to not look like its target. Also, more fiber optic cable is getting deployed there. Now, other people can speak to this. Fiber optic cable tends to be a two-way problem, but generally, if you've just shot something at the guy at the other end of the fiber optic cable, then they're going to be too dead to come and chase you down. It's just interesting. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Russia itself. According to the Washington Post, Russia won't start negotiations until it regains control of the Kursk region, with the Kremlin saying we gotta have it by the time Trump is inaugurated on January 20th. So far, multiple of these deadlines have passed, and it's a huge loss of face for Russia to do so. In fact, it sounds like they've basically said we're not talking until Kursk is back under our control. Okay, that's what you want, how you want to play it. It just means that there'll be a lot more death and destruction because you're too proud to admit they got the best of you. Russia is now deploying Shahed 136 kamikaze drones with an upgraded satellite nav system to evade Ukrainian defenses. The new ones are less susceptible to jamming and spoofing, so they've upgraded their stuff yet again. Be interesting to find out where the components come from. I do note that this is English on the board here, which makes me wonder where the manufacturer is. Just saying. Be interesting to find out where some of the components that are hidden might have come from. Russia is facing a shortage of junior officers due to heavy frontline losses, and now they're standing up new military training centers at civilian universities so they can quickly take the flower of Russian power and turn it into officers to be thrown into the meat grinder. So these are supposed to be low-level officers so they can have leadership as part of their artillery and their larger units. But we'll have to see if that turns out to anything new. This one caught my eye, not because it's directly related, and at least it might or might not be. Russian celebrity chef Alexei Zimin is an outspoken critic of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and he was found dead at age 52. He did run a restaurant in London and was found deceased in a hotel room. An autopsy and toxicology report are underway. So the question is, did he end up in the polonium tea? Ukrainian drones attacked a military base in Krasnodar Krai. I'm going to mute this thing here. It's pretty loud. This guy's just kind of walking around. Looks like he's lighting a cigarette. And then one of those drones comes in and kaboom, knocks him off his feet. The Russians claim 51 drones were knocked down overnight. No telling how many of them actually impacted the actual targets, but interesting to see nonetheless. And to be honest, I thought the video of this guy getting bowled over by the explosion was pretty funny. The Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia wants to limit the period of stay of Ukrainian citizens in Russia without special documents. I'm surprised it took them this long. Then there's news like this one. Russia prepares Ukrainian children in the occupied territories for war against their own country. This is actually a war crime, but in the end, it's Russia for you. Dairy prices are soaring. Inflation acceleration in Russia is going beyond the limits of normal seasonal dynamics, according to the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and the brother of Russian Defense Minister Dmitry Belousov. So some of the inflationary pressures are getting pretty insignificant. We already mentioned the butter that was being had the protective containers with the RFID tags in them. And we're seeing this broadly. In fact, a food blogger of all people compared his 2023 receipts to his 2024 receipts and revealed that inflation is much higher than Russia likes to let on. A Yakut soldier cut off his own leg and waited 17 days for help. Russian propagandists say this shows how heroic he is. But they don't mention the fact that this indicates there's some real problems with evacuating wounded soldiers from the battlefield on the Russian side. They are often left, even if they survive, They may end up right back into a Russian assault unit, meat assault group, or they may not be allowed to even return home at all. It's pretty crazy stuff. Winter electric blackouts have begun in Moscow, with 8 buildings losing their electricity at the Green Park apartment complex due to an accident at the MSC Energo power grid. People were stuck in elevators for hours, and that's right at freezing. So we're early in the season to be losing the heating in Russia. Now, this one is from Wargonzo, again, Russian source. The video is short. I got to mute the audio because I think it's copyrighted audio there. But if you watch carefully, it's hard to see because it's kind of blurry, but this drone is carrying a stick. That's right, they are assaulting each other's drones with sticks now. And they make this funny story about them, but they say they've knocked 9 drones down with a stick. So, apparently sticks work. This is a mass burial near the settlement of Snezhnoye in the Horlivka district of Donetsk region, containing about 6,000 Russian soldiers' bodies that are listed as missing in action. As Dmitry at War Translated observes, if they're missing in action, they don't have to have their death benefits paid. Now, this is fun. We've seen cope cages on motorcycles, tanks, armored vehicles. Now this one actually has this drone has a cope cage on it as well. That's supposed to be, we believe, intended to prevent it from being taken down by other drones. Not sure how effective that's going to be with that, as little of a cage as there is there. An explosion would take it quite down. At least 3 large Russian oil refineries have had to halt processing or cut runs due to heavy losses this year. Export curbs, rising crude prices, and high borrowing costs have driven the cost cuts as Russia's oil market struggles, per Reuters. And this is part of what the war on Russia's oil industry was for. It was to stop Russia from being able to export these oil products, stop them from being able to refine and make things like jet fuel and lubricants. It's basically all the right things at one place. If you destroy Russia's oil infrastructure, they can't get money and they can't produce fuel for their vehicles and equipment. The ruble has dropped to 1 for a penny now. Once again, this is actually its second time at about this point in recent history. The Russians have been trying to bolster the ruble by basically buying back all the rubles they could with foreign currencies they had on hand. They're stripping their national wealth fund to try and boost the ruble up so it doesn't look like it's collapsing quite so badly. According to a survey, Russian support for the war in Ukraine remains stable at about 76%. There are some stress fracture points, we should say. Big cities, less supportive. Women, less supportive. Older, and the older people tend to be very supportive. Older people remember a very different era. We'll just put it that way. And this one caught my eye. In Voronezh, female students were asked to fill out a questionnaire on reproductive health, indicating personal data. Now, Russia's already got a demographic problem. Their population is effectively collapsing. The loss of an entire generation effectively in the war in Ukraine is dragging on their overall ability to replenish. They constantly talk about women should be barefoot and pregnant and popping out babies like crazy so they have more meat to send to the war in Ukraine. Obviously, that's going to mean that they're expecting it to last at least 18 years. Now, it doesn't it? There's been a lot of things like this, though, where we look at it in the West and say that is a tremendous violation of privacy. But this is Russia. There is nothing but what belongs to the state. Back on the 6th of November, Ukraine targeted the Caspian port of Kaspiysk in Russia with a UAV. They was likely hosting a bunch of vessels at the time. The damage was light, and likely the vessels impacted will be able to be quickly repaired and returned to service. But the tempo of military operations in the Black Sea remains pretty darn low, according to the Defense Intelligence of the UK. And that's kind of the news out of Russia right there. Now let's get into some other interesting news on the international front. For one thing, Gazprom has stopped sending gas supplies to Austria. And I've gone through this a couple of times from a bunch of different sources. Basically, an Austrian company won an arbitration, basically a lawsuit against Gazprom for $242 million. Gazprom said, we're not paying that. So they said, no problem. We'll just take it from the money we're supposed to pay you for gas. And Gazprom went, oh, no. Hold the phone. I'm just not going to send you any gas anymore. So that ended that. But the thing is that Austria has actually made a lot of preparations for this. They have diversified their gas supply capabilities. They've got alternate suppliers. Their gas supply storage is full, and they are ready for winter. As they said, nobody will be freezing in Austria this winter. Over in Germany, members of Scholz's party are urging Boris Pistorius to be their candidate for chancellor, according to Spiegel. This would indicate that Poul Scholz is really suffering for support, and the collapse of his coalition has resulted in him being no longer trusted to be in the position. The Free Democratic Party in Germany may put the issue of supplying Ukraine with these Taurus missiles to a vote. This could be just electioneering, getting ready for the elections in February, or it could be a legitimate policy position. We'll have to see what comes out. Estonia supported the proposal of the defense minister to send a new package to Ukraine. This is naval uniforms, surveillance devices, sights, ballistic protection, and ammunition. Obviously, every little bit counts. The Polish foreign minister has announced key talks on Ukraine in Warsaw next week with France, Germany, Ukraine, and EU officials, with no decisions being made without Ukraine's input. Not sure what to make of this one yet, but we'll be keeping an eye on it. Of course, with the new cooperation between North Korea and Russia, with North Korea sending arms and munitions and troops to Russia, the United States, Japan, and South Korea sent the sternly worded letter. This is the dread of all governments across the world to receive a sternly worded letter. So, there you go. The European Union. Stephen says, the drone-on-drone combat reminds me of the beginning of air-to-air combat in World War I. It started with throwing rocks at each other and handguns. Oh, yes, absolutely. And in fact, early in the war, the spotter pilots would be flying around the trenches and the areas they were looking at, and they'd wave at each other and have a great time, and you pass each other as they went until somebody figured out that they were carrying a pistol. So, and that changed aerial warfare forever. The European Union is preparing a 15th package of sanctions against Russia, this time targeting the shadow fleet of tankers used by Moscow to secretly deliver oil to the market. This is also going to target other individuals that are involved in Russia's illegal oil trade. Be interesting to see what comes out of that. I don't have any details on it yet, but interesting nonetheless. Now, this is back to Trump for just a moment. Polish President Duda expects that Trump won't allow Russia to destroy Ukraine, quote, because he respects U.S. taxpayers' money, meaning that the U.S. taxpayer has sent a lot of equipment over to Ukraine, and to lose all that investment for nothing would look bad for Trump. Poland remains ready to transfer their MiG-29 jets to Ukraine, but only if NATO partners put Western fighter jets to Polish bases and secure Polish airspace. I'm still wondering why nobody's taken them up on that. Now this is Georgia, the country, not Georgia, the U.S. state. The head of the Georgia Central Election Commission was doused with paint during approval of parliamentary election results, which the opposition considers falsified. Georgia has got riots and demonstrations going on right now, but I think overall it looks like the government is going to successfully put those down at this point in time. I'll be watching this continuing though, but as every time I see this, it tells me that there are fractures in the Russian coalition, for lack of a better way to say it. The people tend to not want what Russia is offering. And yet the leaders who are in Russia's pockets keep pushing it. So we'll see. Israel destroyed an active nuclear weapons research facility in Iran. Again, not directly related to Ukraine, but this is really stepping it up, directly targeting Iran's pride and joy, its nuclear weapons program. A unit of let's try that in English this time. A Ukrainian unit went to France and was trained by the French, marking the first time this has happened since World War I. Interestingly enough, the unit, which has about 2,000 people strong, was sent back to Ukraine in accompaniment with a bunch of French heavy hardware. Well, heavy being a misnomer in this case, but light tanks, artillery, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles. They're fully outfitted by France, this entire unit. Really interesting to see. That's the way to do it. There's been a lot of, there's been some interest in potentially reactivating or taking the sanctions away regarding Nord Stream pipelines and Nord Stream 2. There's obviously Russia would like that to happen again because that would start getting Europe addicted to Russian oil and gas again. But there's been a lot of pushback against that as well. The editor-in-chief of Russian state media, Russia Today, has announced that Russia is opening a new TV station in Serbia soon. Western pundits and politicos like to claim that Serbia wants to be in the West. Serbia's, Vucic has certainly been indicating that he'd much rather be in Russia's orbit. And this is one more sign thereof. We need to wake up and figure out what's going wrong here. Going back to Georgia for just a moment here, the Central Election Commission did approve the final protocol from the parliamentary elections, confirming that Georgian Dream, which is pro-Russian, allegedly won 53.93% of the vote with a parliamentary majority, but the protesters have other things to say. And that continues on. Putin and Schultz had a telephone call, and they apparently spoke for about an hour. Peskov is refusing to say what the call was about. But Putin basically, as far as we can tell, Putin once again told Schultz that he's demanding that Ukraine capitulate and overturn their government and become basically a Russian puppet state. China may have finally broken their quote-unquote embargo and provided lethal weapons to Russia for the first time. They say the evidence is convincing. I've not seen the evidence yet. But once again, we're seeing that Russia, China, Iran are getting closer together, not farther apart. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I can tell you one of them is the fact that we have not had the force of will to put down Putin's little invasion. On the other end of the stick, the U.S. will partner with Ukraine to transition Ukraine's coal-fired plants to small modular nuclear reactors and to use them to help decarbonize its steel industry. The small modular nuclear reactors are pretty small, actually. The ones I've seen are basically the size of a small shipping container, some even smaller than that. But by going to a much more modular system, they could even put a whole bunch of them together at one place, or they could decentralize them. But either way, by going to a nuclear setup of these small modular nuclear reactors, could make these much easier to repair and replace when they get damaged or destroyed, because they tend to be the small modular nuclear reactors tend to be portable. You basically throw it onto a flat car and go take it into place. Use a crane to drop it in. Voila, you're done. Hook it up and off it goes. They're also really, really safe from the research I've done in the past. Now let's talk about Abkhazia for a bit. Now, Abkhazia is a part of Georgia that Russia has directly taken control of. Or I should say, they have directly occupied. There was a new law proposed and was being signed through the parliament that basically gave Russian oligarchs priority access to the real estate and funds of this area, of this Abkhazia area. And the problem was that would mean pushing out the locals instead, and riots started. Now, there's a lot going on here, so I'm going to try and summarize this as best I can. Opposition forces had clashes with security forces in the area, managed to actually take control of the parliament building and the government offices. They're now doing, basically providing a forum for people to come and talk to the opposition forces as if they are the government there. The president of Abkhazia fled. Initially, they said to his childhood home, but later they said to a Russian military base. And he said that he would resign if the protesters would leave the government offices. I'm not sure I believe that, but he said it. Then he said no, he would not resign. So take your pick as to which one you wish to believe. I am of a mind that he just wanted them out so he could go and take over again. The head of the State Security Service came out to negotiate with the protesters and promised to convey their demands to the head of state. Again, this is a very dynamic situation. The citizens of Abkhazia have managed to effectively displace the Russian-sponsored government there. Now, this is not all roses and song, because I've had to dig into this just a little bit deeper. The opposition party is also pro-Russia. So both the president of Abkhazia and the opposition leader have been getting in touch with Putin saying, no, I am much better for Russia if you'll support me here in this situation. So even if this law caused this issue, the end result is still going to be another pro-Russian regime going into place, assuming the opposition doesn't actually take this opposition leader and invite him to go on a long walk off a short pier. But again, this is a very dynamic situation. The military mostly appears to be standing to the side right now. Police have been mostly on the side of protesters. The protesters have armed themselves from police armories. And it's a very dynamic situation right now that I cannot speak to. And I cannot say which side is the good side. I don't know who you would support in this one, but I can tell you that both sides at this point in time are looking for support from Russia. That said, how much can Russia actually afford to spare to help? We'll have to find out. So overall, that's kind of the situation. Institute for the Study of War also put out a piece on it. It's shorter. The protesters were waving Russian flags, and they did say that the problem wasn't with Russia, but with the Abkhazian government. So again, which one are you going to pick? Yeah, which one's the big one? I can tell you that either way, this does indicate that the Russian coalition, for lack of a better term, is fracturing, if not collapsing. And that's going to be the issue we see going forward. Now, there's not a lot going on the front lines here today, so let's go ahead and just quickly bust through that. Zaporizhia, no significant changes. This is from War Gonzo, of course. Donetsk, they do talk about the Ukrainians doing some counterattacks and the Russians, quote, advancing in the direction of the settlement of Boretsky. South of Kharkovo, or they say that the Russians are developing an offensive, and they are advancing west of Seladovo. Generally speaking, this seems to be relatively close to what I'm seeing. Chasiv Yar, the Russian forces, quote, put pressure on Ukrainian defense on the flanks. No changes in the lines of control. Kursk, no significant changes in the front there. He always phrases this as the Ukrainian armed forces counterattacking, but the Ukrainian armed forces are pretty much holding lines, not counterattacking from everything I've seen. Therefore, I cannot give too much credence to his analysis beyond the lack of significant changes. Over in Bakhmut, it's clear that that Ukraine no longer has any presence on the east side of the SD Canal. This was a big area that we looked at middle of last year, where Ukraine was making some real progress into this area that stalled out in the period where the assistance to Ukraine was stalled up by political maneuvering in the U.S. Kharkova, Russia's occupied the remnants of Antonivka and actively moving towards Yelzavetivka. There we go. They're slowly starting to withdraw from the area to prevent being trapped. So they are keeping an eye on this salient area right here. In Chernihiv, the Russian forces hoisted their flag on the eastern side of the Sadost River, but the Ukrainians have denied that Russians are inside of Khremyakh. They do appear on Ukrainian territory east of the river. Still gray zone. It's difficult to defend. Likely the Ukrainians will cede it just so they don't waste a bunch of personnel on it. Kupiansk, the Russians managed to do a breakthrough on the outskirts of Kupiansk, but then they got kicked back out, and they're maneuvering on the northern outskirts and attempted to enter several times without success. Don't know how long that's going to last. As Knoll report states, how long will Ukraine manage without proper defense? And the high-level summary, we don't even have to touch on Kursk. There's been no changes. No changes over here in Kharkiv. I don't remember there being any changes up here in the north end to speak of. Yep, none there. They state, dang it, there we go. They state that the Ukrainians managed to make an advance into Makarivka, which is the first I've seen of a change in this area. This is, again, the Ukrainians managed to get down past Staromaorsk, whereas the Russians have managed to gradually push back in this area for some time. Overall, though, we're seeing very teeny tiny changes, no big ones. Just little rumples and little tiny pseudopods extending in various places as the lines adjust and change. No big changes, like I said. Tough fighting, no question about that. But neither side is taking huge swaths of land at this point in time. And that's the situation on the front lines. Let's go ahead and roll into the interesting extras, and I've got some good ones here. We're starting with the cute cat first. Let me back this up, make sure it's muted. Bloop. They found this cat underneath this pallet in the middle of just absolutely nowhere. And, of course, what do? Well, the same thing they always do. They rescue the cat. I'm always amazed, again, that the Ukrainians will spend the time to rescue cats and dogs and sheep and cows and any animal that could be in the area. Just a tremendous amount of heart there. Kharkova direction, drone drops into this T. I think this is an 80 tank. And initially it doesn't look like it goes off, but a second drone drops a bomb inside of it. This is kind of a little compilation of various drone strikes here, showing that the battle is raging on in Kharkova direction. The Estonian military has been preparing for a potential Russian invasion. They even demolished a bridge in preparation for that reason there. And to be honest, it looks like a pretty good job here. Let me back up here. Neat controlled demolition, dropped it right there. Obviously, this is not like a river or something like that. So this bridge in particular wouldn't cause a huge amount of pause, but still, they're training for this. The Estonians have plenty of experience with Russia, and they've definitely given it a thumbs down. This one was just kind of a fun video that I'm just going to let kind of play in the background here. If you watch it as it goes through, this is a combat mission in the Kursk area, advancing to deliver supplies, engaging enemy positions. They even take an FPV strike and retreat with no casualties. The reason I brought this one up is because this is what it looks like when there's no casualties, where the crew survives. This is not what the Russians say whenever something blows up, but the crew survived. No, the crew didn't survive in a Russian tank when it blows its entire top off. This is what it looks more like. They take a hit, they come back. That's what coming back without casualties looks like. This was impressive. This is Ukrainian anti-aircraft guns in Odessa trying to counter a swarm attack by Russian Geron-2 drones. This is all small-ish arms fire. All these tracers. This is basically the last ditch. We are out of any other options here. The missiles weren't able to intercept them. There's just too many of them. We're now down to effectively World War II era air defense. Now they've probably got some radar involved in this to try and make it more effective. Even this little boat in the front here, you can see is involved in the defense. It looks like it's right out of Star Wars, is what it looked like to me. This looks like this would be part of a Star Wars battle with all this tracer fire going. If you watch this video carefully, let me see if I can get this a little bit bigger for you here. A Ukrainian Leopard 2 tank shoots this BMP right here, and the round actually passes clean through the tank and strikes and ends up impacting in the dirt behind. This is one of the tungsten penetrator APFSDS rounds. This is definitely not the right round to engage something like a BMP. Yes, you can kill a BMP with an APFSDS. That's not what we're saying. But it's going to do things like this far more often than causing lethal damage. And somebody said, well, why aren't they using heat rounds or high explosive anti-tank? That would be the perfect round to engage a BMP with, which is a lightly armored vehicle. They don't have enough of the heat rounds. In fact, they'd probably have done better with a large high explosive round, one that the U.S. now doesn't even produce. They do have an all-purpose round that can be basically tuned to the target, but those are expensive, whereas basic high explosives are cheap. In the end, though, this is what it looks like when one of those rounds passes clean through a BMP. And for a little bit of a lighter bit of content, just for a moment or two, what makes keep their spirits up in the dugouts? Yep, cats. You pet them, they purr, and your mood gets much better, then you can carry on with your service. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me, Luciano. Glad to see you again. It's been busy over here. I've done a few live streams, but not on a regular basis. I'm trying to find ways to get shorter ones in and a little bit more frequent. It depends. Work's been very busy, and I may not have a lot of time to do it. Would you guys be interested in a version of these live streams? It's only about 20, 30 minutes. Because I might be able to do that in a quick sort of a short version of this, almost where I'm doing the research along with you to show you the things that are going on in Ukraine. Let me know in the comments if you would find more frequent, much shorter live streams like that to be useful. I'd appreciate knowing, because if there's enough interest and I can pull it off, It's always that's the challenge there, is I got to be able to pull it off. Then I would love to be able to do more of these streams again. These full length ones do require a lot of research, but paring it down, I could do some shorter ones and then have a longer one that I do on a regular basis, kind of as the larger picture. So let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate every single one of you. You guys make these live streams worth doing. And on that note, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.